not gonna cause any hiccups.
Make me that beautiful host. Lobby host. The host of the lobby. The lobbyist. The hostess. Tip me well. Yeah, dude, it should be good. We're also very lucky because Mao Zedong himself is in chat apparently. He came as hickory as possible. Hello, my pretties. Okay, Twitch chat's already being very Twitch chat today, where it's like, sometimes I think I say weird shit, and then I read Twitch chat, and I'm like, I'm a normie. I'm like, I'm the most normal person in the world compared to Twitch chat. Holy shit.
I don't know, you say some pretty good stuff. I've been clipping your stream, repeatedly.
Why, thank you for that.
Schwarzenegger and his doggo. Florencio's corruptors with the bladder.
When you
remember those.
You watch enough 25-minute Florencio games where he's already won, and you spend a lot of time staring at units and thinking of backstories for them. That man does not know how to finish a game. It's kind of his charm. So anyway, before we talk about TvT, it's actually been ages since we coached, dude. You've been around in chat, but it's been over a month. Obviously we did a few sessions. Are you still playing as much? Did you have like a few weeks off at all? Has it been more or less pretty consistent, 10, 15 hours a week, like a good number of games?
Also had to move, so it's kind of busy for like 2 weeks.
Okay.
Now more settled in, so a little more now.
Okay, so there's about 2 weeks break from play, so there's a bit of disruption. It wasn't like non-stop, but we're back into it now. Okay, cool. So overall, actually, what's your MMR at? Is it kind of the same as when we started, a bit lower?
4850.
4850, a little bit higher. Fantastic. And we are getting to that point where
a lot,
as is natural.
Occasionally, I'll just drop like 300 MMR and just think, something's wrong. But eventually, stay calm and then slowly comes back up.
Yeah, it's also where we're at that level where every little bit, like, getting up 200 MMR, like stable, so with average MMR, not just peaking at 5k, but for you to take, say, 4850 is your average right now, and then we get to 5k as your average, that's like a big jump. Like, as you get higher at any skill level, right, it's just more work for less obvious payoff, right? Because you're getting down to the elite tip of the player base, there's more details. Does that mean we can't improve? No, but it means like it's just naturally there needs to be a little bit more detail-oriented kind of focus to continue improving, right? To really get the most out of it, we need to just, basically also remember that we're at the point where if we want to relearn, I mean, it's always the case where if you want to learn to approach the game in a new way, we don't want to be too MMR focused, right? We want to be kind of like, hey, I'm learning a new skill and it's going to give me more variety, more depth. It's going to help me be able to flex my strategies more, but it might not necessarily be the most amazing right now at this exact second in time. So it's kind of one of those things where we do need more patience as we get higher up that ladder, but it also kind of comes down to what our focus is at any one point in time. So if you've got builds that seem to work well in the meta, you've been working on them for a while, it's something where we might become a lot more focused on, hey, let's make that 200, 300 MMR jump, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. Because you know what? These builds seem good. We're feeling competitive. We want to move up the ladder. That's really motivating for us at the moment. Whereas at another time, you're like, oh, I'm swapping from mech to bioplay in all 3 matchups. And we're like, yeah, cool. Let's drop down the ladder a bit. Like, we're not so focused on that. Let's just focus on getting the hang of the style and the details of, like, learning those new skills.
Right. I think sometimes it's hard to tell, like, if something isn't working, like, it's hard to tell if your build is bad or, your build is fine, but it's just executed poorly. I think that's been a tricky thing to decipher because I've also wiggled around the builds a little bit. Like here I'm doing a double factory open. It's supposed to be gas first. I accidentally screwed that up, did barracks first, so it's a little off at the beginning, but idea is the same.
Okay, so and it is one of the harder things. There's a quote from Neeb a couple of years back, and he was like, oh yeah, I just think it's harder to know why you lost when you're playing Terran than for him. He was like, I find it easier to know what I did wrong when I played Protoss. He's like, it's easier to figure out, hey, I can focus on this and get better, right? Whereas with Terran, yeah, it is played a little bit differently. So nice lock on Cyclone. Locked on, didn't fire a single rocket. So okay, anyway, let's revisit that, and likewise, if you find yourself being like, I really want to move up the ladder, I feel like I'm stagnating, anything like that, these are important feelings because that all ties into our motivation. So if you're feeling anything like that, let me know, and we can try to like really focus harder on one area to whatever's most important at us at the time. And let's just make sure we don't be like, oh no, it's fine, like it's okay, it's natural, but like we're actually really annoyed that we're not leveling up. So just keep aware of what's important to you at any point while you're playing, and we'll kind of keep an open dialogue on that. So if that becomes really important, let me know and we'll focus on that.
Right. I've been trying to focus more on just, you know, learning new things, refining skills, and having fun. Like trying to focus less on MMR because it was like getting into my head, to be honest.
Good.
And I think that happens a lot. Because
yeah.
I identify too much with my MMR. I realize, you know, it's not a good feeling, and then you tilt, and then a bunch of bad stuff. But
Exactly.
I think I've been slowly kind of creeping up. Like when we first started coaching, it was about 44, 45. Several weeks back, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we had 47 written in here, but I think that was updated after our first coaching session. So actually update that in the document if you can. Feels good to write that down. Update that number to 4850.
Awesome.
Noise. Okay, so as always, you are what we call a weirdo Terran, where you do lots of odd, strange styles. So you just did a Widowmine Hellion Cyclone attack on your opponent's natural, and it actually worked quite well. However, we're pretty lucky there wasn't a single siege tank or a bunker, right? I'm pretty sure either of those ruined that attack.
Right. I think I would have pulled back in that case.
Yeah.
I just, you know, wanted to get a feel for it.
Good. Because if we're headbutting into that, that's obviously terrible. So
Right. Especially if it's on the high ground, then it's like, you know.
Exactly. So you mentioned it's a gas first. You're doing a 2 factory. Way back when we'd started doing like a 3cc build here in TvT for a little bit, didn't we? It was TvT where we started, and I'm totally fine that you flexed away from that. And it's cool to keep that because, like I said, like in certain metas, certain times, that might just be like an awesome free win. It might be amazing. And it was a different way to play where we were really focusing on what you were trying to achieve, which was getting up a shitload of reacted factory units and, you know, spreading widow mines across the map essentially, and running around with them, right? And we needed a bigger economy to support those less efficient but more mobile units. So now we're kind of going back towards a later third base here, and I'm kind of just taking a look at everything, and I want you to take a moment, and you've watched a lot of my coaching, you hung out on the stream, we've coached a bunch of times. What do you think I'm going to ask you about your build order next?
Like, what is my vision?
Yeah.
Like, unit composition.
Yeah. So what is it?
Add-on.
For TvT, I've been focusing mostly like Hellion, Tank, Widow, like.
Command center upgrade.
With the Cyclone, I've been kind of experimenting with it a little, like anywhere from no Cyclones to 2 early Cyclones, and that's it, or making Cyclones all game long.
I think I like the early Cyclones. They're pretty good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I realized I needed it for at least a bit of anti-air. You know, if anything.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm still very confused and inconsistent about are the factory tech lab upgrades. Like inconsistent timing, inconsistent ordering. It's just not completely clear to me.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And the other part, of course, would be your exact build order, right? So knowing the exact order of things. Now you said obviously you accidentally went barracks gas rather than gas first. You changed up your opening slightly here. So it did end up being an ultimate greedy D-bag opening, because you've gone low ground expand with no SCV scout, and you've also kind of just gone 1 Reaper into reactor factory. So this is the greediest possible opening you can do, where you will get killed by many things if you do this sort of play.
I've been trying to just like scout for the 2 racks Reaper proxy.
Right, and just
and
that.
if I don't see that, I just assume it's like a 1-1-1 or fast expand. Even if it's a 1-1-1, I think the Hellions and the Cyclone and the SCVs hold it decently well.
With a gas first, yeah, definitely. I think you're as long with this one, it's a bit later. Yeah, so I think that's good. At least you're scouting for the Proxy Reaper, and then like just doing the like, look, that's the one hole in that build. And even then, like sometimes like they screw up their micro slightly, and like you actually get out the reactor 2 Hellions, and you're fine even against Proxy Reaper with your build. So that's cool. But anyway, so you've gone, you know, straight for second factory here. You're building your SCVs. So can you just write out your little list here on the document? So it's like, okay, you know, it's gas first. I'm gonna write it here. I'll give you a little, I'll start it for you and you can add it. So it's gas first, expand, second factory, you know, and you can take over from there. Yeah.
Yeah, second factory immediately after first. Pump out Hellions and Cyclone. So I would say I think add 6 Hellions, 1 Cyclone, add 2 Widows. Mostly defensively. In this case, I used it aggressively. Third CC at like, you know, 430, something like that. And then eBay, Armory, and then 2 more factories.
What have we forgotten?
4th CC and then 2 more factories. Whoa.
One thing.
Starport.
2 things then.
Frick.
You haven't written down when your natural
This
gases.
one is Starport. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Natural. Oh wait, yeah. Natural gas is usually after.
Not usually, always. Even if you don't put it in practice always, that's what it always is, mentally at the very least, so that we know to try and tighten ourselves up on that. Because those gas timings varying will ruin you, man. That will just throw everything off. Like if you get your double armory finish and you don't have 200, I guarantee you're going to play a much worse game because you're going to just have your macro kind of weird. It's going to be weird.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And like I oftentimes find myself is like my armories are ready, but I have like 0 gas, and then I tell myself I'll come back to it later, but I keep spending the gas, and then it never really gets upgraded.
And even if you do get on top of it and you put some attention towards that, like it probably steals attention away from your other stuff. So you're like not microing your harassment. Like you've got like a cyclone that should be picking off the Raven when it comes across. Instead, you're busy looking at that, and your 2 cyclones waiting outside their base just get killed when they start pushing across the map because you don't micro them, right? Like it's like the little things because it doesn't line up, right? It's just like such an unnecessary thing where it should be automated. And if it's automated, your life's easy. If it's not automated, we suddenly add more details and more opportunities for ourselves to screw up. And remember, we're idiots. We're all idiots. We're all terrible StarCraft players. You know, and we want to make it as easy for us as possible, right? So you want to imagine, you know, you want to give yourself a padded room, a padded map, right? So you can headbutt into it and fall over, and you're not going to hurt yourself. We want to make it a bit easier for ourselves. So
right. To line things up better, I've been trying to chain my build order into like bigger blocks. So like the 3rd CC into double gas at natural is one such chain.
Yeah. So yeah,
I've been trying to create a few more of those blocks.
Awesome. I think that's beautiful. I really like that. And yeah, often I'll even, like the way you wrote it there is totally fine. I'll often do it like, I'll do like a little indented point. I'll be like, you know, 2 gases natural.
Okay, yeah.
But it's whatever works for you. I just, you know.
I actually like that better.
As long as you have your own consistent shorthand, then it's all it's all good. And I think this is something like I've got another student I'm going to be working with tomorrow, the day after, is Taryn. And I'm pretty sure we're going to spend a lot of our first session with me just kind of trying to get him into writing down his build orders more. Because I think having that ability to kind of plan is so important, right? You know, define so that we can actually get to the refining stage. And your build order is already, just the way you described that to me, is so much better than, like, I remember our first session and it was like so loose. So loose.
I was like, I don't know.
You're like, I do the thing.
You know, anywhere from 4 to 8 factories.
Yep. And you're like, build some widow mines, take some gases, build some command centers at some point, and it was it was real loose. So this is cool because like your starport you kind of forgot temporarily and then remembered, wrote it down. The gases, you didn't have it written down in the build, but you at least had it chained up to the command center. So even if it wasn't like mentally in like a build order written out list, it's something which you're probably relatively consistent with. Though I think this game we were late on it. Let's take a look, because I think we got in 3rd CC. Let's see. Did we chain it up in this replay?
Up in that little. Yeah, if I'm like.
Hey, we chained it.
Small.
We chained it. Cool. Good job, man.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes like my build order and chains really fall apart if there's a lot of harass going on, or if I'm over microing the front, and then it's just not pretty.
It's kind of like a balancing act, because sometimes it's good to do that, right? Like sometimes you got to drop the plan in the chaotic moment and adapt a bit, and sometimes you're doing it when it's not necessary and it's really bad. So it's kind of funny. Sometimes we get rewarded for it, sometimes punished. So looking at it, let's explore this from here. So you're normally going kind of just traditional mech, tanks, Hellions. You do like to mix Widow Mines in. You're a big Widow Mine fan. I love the annoying Widow Mines on the map. I think a lot of, especially bio players, get super tilted by them. But even like a mech versus mech battle, if you land a Widow Mine shot or two on their Vikings, it's huge. If you're both fighting for the air war, and you keep those Cyclones alive to get a few lock-ons here and there, and you really babysit your Cyclones all game, like it can really turn the air war. Adding a Thor at some point can turn the air war as well. Lots of cool shit that can happen. Compositionally, happy with how you're playing this. Unfortunately, oh, that was a misclick on the gas here in your natural, so that's good. Because for a second I was about to say, wait, did you put guys on one gas and not the other when they both started at the same time? Because that would be a terrible move, right? That's so dumb for those to not be chained together, but that was just a misclick. So
yeah.
Misclicks happen. Misclicks happen.
I didn't even realize that.
Not a fan of your armories. You threw them down at the same time, but they're not next to each other. I can't remember. Do you control group your armories? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, well, recently to 0.
You still more often manually click on them though, or?
I've been trying to use 0 more.
Okay, cool.
The 0 hotkey, yeah.
My man. Yeah, if they were next to each other, it would just be a little bit nicer, but it's fine. It's not the biggest deal. It's like a real small little thing.
It would be way more space efficient. I should do that. And I think they just, like, there could probably be a factory by that right armory.
Yeah. And then you're going up in your factories. So what did we write in the build? Do you go straight up to, you go up to 4 factories, 2 factories, and then it's 2 more tech labs, right? And then 4th CC, and then another 2 more factories. And is it a reactor and a tech lab on the last 2, or do you just stay 1 reactor all game? Okay, cool.
It's like 4, typically 4 tech, 2 reactor.
Nice.
I might wiggle that a little bit, like depending on the game, but yeah, I think that's the most common.
Okay. And then I kind of like that your turret timing seems to not be as ultra conservative as it used to be. Problem I see at this point in this game is that like you're a little bit your front is a little bit soft.
The front? As in,
Yeah.
like, between the natural and the third?
I just mean that there's only 2 tanks out. Basically, it's like 8 minutes 30 and you have very few siege tanks. And you're already building 2 Thors. Or even 1 Thor this early would be very early, right? So we've got to be kind of worried about just getting overwhelmed by either, you know, say that drop came in with 2 more medevacs with like 2 tanks and another 8 marines, and it dropped in the right-hand side of your natural and gets sieged up. Like your Thors aren't going to help break that very much at all, right? Because they're going to have tanks shelling your Thors and marines. So, you know, this was something where you were very Thor-focused in your earlier games, and it's good you've broken that habit. But even now, you're also building a Cyclone at this point as well. So it still seems like a little bit kind of oddball, the mix of units you're going for. And whilst you're getting a very good ring of defense up, and a lot of players won't test you on the front because they're like, he's going mech, I can't push in there. We're actually very fragile on the front. Like any frontal push could cause us a big amount of problems. Will we see the Hero Widow Mine? Not bad. Not bad. So I just want to kind of, I guess there's that moment where you're like, okay, drops are starting to become a risk. Let's put turrets everywhere. You even had 2 Widow Mines in the main, I think, at some point. I think you did, but I don't think you flew over them. Prior to that drop. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this was all kind of cool, but yeah, definitely it's something where I was just looking at this and I'm kind of saying like, okay, what's the exact priority here? Because like getting that 3rd down, it's got to be, you know, tanks as much as possible. If we can afford a tank on the high ground, that's good in our main base, but often you can't get that until you've got at least like 4 tanks out or something like that.
What if he's like bio heavy, like this game? Like I think my feeling is that, you know, I'm seeing bio and medevacs. Probably just build more Hellions, Widow Mines, and Vikings.
Well, tanks are actually the unit that like really shuts them down. Now, because he happens to be, I mean, he's going pure reactor, I assume. Let's go take a look. Yeah, he's mostly just building Marines, no Marauders. The problem is if you go for that and then they've got Marauder, like triple tech lab or something, and they've got mostly Marauders, like your Hellions do not clear those units up. Hellbat's helped by time, but it's really the tanks that are like the generic beats everything on the ground unit, right? So the tanks, as long as you can stop the drops from out positioning you, because obviously, like, yeah, bio player is often going to drop around, and having a few Widow Mines I think is still really good here. But I think like Cyclones is really pointless in this scenario, because what have we should have recognized by this point, you're up against a medevac Terran player, right? He's not trying to contest you in the air war. So Vikings become very unimportant in this game. Like having about 6 Vikings, incredible. And past that point, they don't really do much for you except kill the medevac slightly faster in the battle, right?
Right.
So in this scenario, when you've got the Viking advantage up against medevacs, about 6, at most 8 Vikings. If you're building 14, 12 Vikings, some people get way too focused on it. That's really bad, right? Because they're just useless in the ground fight. But what could we use that starport for instead? Like, what is a way you can make that air advantage even more powerful?
I could use Liberators.
Hells to the shit, yeah, man. If you get out of Liberator, the harassment, but even in the front as well. Like, if they start doing, like, siege ops on locations and using scans, even though you've got the Vikings, so you can't really dislodge them, like you can just have a single Liberator just sieges up on their tanks, and it's like, yeah, get out of here, man. Like, if you're ever like, they're really trying to just overwhelm you, you know, like when they're just like running in from all sides and you barely got enough tanks and units to cover every angle, and you're like, oh, I just got to hang on against this, you know, this guy's just trying to break me. Even just having a defensive Liberator sieged up in front of one of your tanks, like even that just does help actually hold an area quite well. So that's something which is important to think about.
Bad tank support, now that you mention it.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like Marines, when they run forward to snipe one, they tend to clump up quite a bit, and you've got tank fire combined with it. They do really good at killing Marauders and tanks as well. So Liberators, yeah, they're a real, actual powerful unit. We think of them as like only for like dislodging their tank line or for counter harassment, but yeah, they're still a good emergency unit to help on the defense. Like, you know, when someone's Ravager busting you, you were kind of planning to Liberator harass, you just siege that on top of your ramp, and it actually sometimes turns the fight around, like, because it can kill a lot of stuff as long as it doesn't get biled down straight away. So let's kind of write down some notes here. So this is one interaction that's really important, right? So Viking count. So we've got to think about the Viking count. If they go medevacs, we don't need more than 6 Vikings. So what's the most important? Make even more sure that you block drops, right? Because they're relying on mobility and their ability to stim around and all this sort of stuff. Block drops and run bys. So don't like unsiege your whole army, move out, and then have 50 Marines just stim into your natural from the side and like get on your production, right? That sounds dumb, but like anyone who's playing a medevac style, it's much more that mobility. So, you know, maybe it's having a few more turrets or having a sensor tower. It's being more aware. It's not going as high on the Vikings. Focus on Liberators. So we'll write that. Add Liberators. You don't need to non-stop build them. I'd say just surviving with tanks and stuff is still the more important priority, because if they're focusing on a medevac army, they're not contesting you in the late game. They might drop 3 starports once they're on 5 base and then swap into Viking control, but it's a long way away, right? So we want to be very cognizant of these stages and where they are. So add Liberators for harass, and then defense plus breaking tank lines are also very useful.
I see. So regarding tank count and production, I think, like, I feel like after my first 2 or 3 Cyclones, I should just replace all the Cyclones I made this game with tanks.
Complete.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah. In general, going Cyclones later on, I think like 2, because they're so fragile, I think like 2 or 3 should be the ultimate number. ever.
Right. Only
Like-
like early game.
Yeah, and the thing is, when they first changed the Cyclone back, TY, Innovation, all these guys, they were always going 2 Cyclones, like the really good macro builds. They would always go 2 Cyclones, and they'd always try to like pick off their opponent's units as they're coming across the map and that sort of stuff. And it'd just be like, lock onto a Raven or a tank as they're moving out with their early pressure, pick it off, pull back. But it's still, even then, it was still very micro-oriented. And some games they'd get, like, the opponent would run around with their Reaper Hellion, and like, as they're moving out with the Tank Marine, they'd bounce the Cyclones with a Reaper Grenade, like, into their shit, and the Cyclones would just die, and you'd be like, well, they didn't really pay for themselves this game. Like, it's an expensive unit, it's very fragile, it's very micro-oriented. So, Cyclones in general, with the style you're playing a 2-factory style, I like 2 to 3 Cyclones. Because you're going to be more active on the map, you're going to be more trying to like, oh, he's being really defensive, I went to pressure, he had a bunker, he had a siege tank, I couldn't break in, now he's pushing out with Ravens and tanks, and like, obviously you can't let that like siege up right outside your base. You need to like try and wear it down as it's coming out. You might even need to pull SCVs to engage it like before it sieges out front your base, that sort of thing. Don't leave the replay, of course. And so we can kind of think about that.
As a quick corollary, TvT, I should just never make mech, right? That's pretty useless.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
There are times, especially like mech versus mech, where like
Command center
if you're like, nah, I'm gonna go 4 Cyclones with Magfield, like maybe you can make it work, but it's got to be such a big focus of your build. And I feel like if you're like, I love Cyclones, that's the only reason I would agree with this. So if you're like, I want to do it, I love my Cyclones, I want to pick some shit off, like I want to have 4 Cyclones when they move out, I want to lock onto a tank and 2 Ravens and just snap them out of the sky with a scan and then get the hell out of there. Like if that's like a big focus of what you enjoy doing, and it's like a cool move that you get a kick out of, because like then I'm okay with it. So what do you reckon?
Probably not that, because
Okay.
I don't know. I just think Cyclone Micro is so hard.
Yeah.
Especially when you're balancing the auto attack with the lock on.
Yes.
And sometimes like if I have other units in my control group, I can't use the Seahawk key. I have to tab and then hit C.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, this is just not gonna. It's not like Stem, which always takes priority, right? You can always hit T, and well, unless you have ghosts. But yeah, it's like a similar challenge.
exactly. So I think this is a good rule. 2 to 3 Cyclones. So we'll add a little upgrades thing there as well. Upgrades. Never make Magfield. Never make Magfield. Never make servos until... Okay, well, servos only in super late game kind of thing, because it's just not important. That's the transform upgrade. Servos only in super late game. And then...
Wait, actually, I have a quick question about that. So I was playing around with the unit tester, basically Hellions against Bio with and without servos. And I find that like... So if you have one, like take one shot on the Bio in Hellion mode, like creep up a bit and then transform into Hellbats really quick, I feel like that can make a pretty big difference.
You ever going to pull that off in a big battle, though? That's the problem.
Well, it's not particularly hard to micro, I think, because like the first attack is just like, you know, a move, and then immediately after the first flame, because the cooldown's so long, you're not going to fire anyways, kind of get in their face and transform into Hellbats.
The problem you're going to be dealing with there is if you've got an overwhelming amount of firepower, that might work, but normally your Hellions are going to be more the tanks. For your siege tanks. the tanks are the Hellbats, right? And while they're transforming, they take damage at Hellion hit points. So they don't actually tick over into the bigger hit point pool until they finish transforming, which is, how long does that take? 2 seconds? Something like that? My mouse over won't work right now. If you click on one of the Hellions, you should be able to check. If you can hover over the ability. 3 whole seconds. That's like so many Marine Marauder attacks, and if they've got some tank sieged as well, like the problem is Hellions only have 90 hit points, and how much is a Hellbat? Like 145 or something like that? 135?
Yeah, something like 50% more or something.
Yeah, so they all die really quickly. So I think that's like one of those overly fancy things where if they're on mostly Marine, just staying in only Hellion form is actually kind of incredible. Like sometimes, like if they're like at this weird point where like they've got like just not that many units, their tanks aren't sieged, and you just kind of like get a big volley off on the Marines while they're clumped, like Hellion form can be good. As a general rule though, unless I know I've got that like that fast blue flame and that like kind of good angle on some clumped up Marines and stuff, I just always go for Hellbat form and just say, look, this way they're going to be reliable and they're going to tank for my units. And the thing is, like, I feel like blue flames way more important for gunning down Marines, and drilling claws for your style, because I think you actually utilize Widow Mines really well, and I'd almost want you to focus on it a little bit more than what you're doing in this game. Like, I actually think drilling claws would be the really cool thing, because even if you're just baiting out a scan each time, like, a lot of the time they're not going to have their Raven alive throughout the longer term of the game. And it's not going to be like everywhere, right? And a lot of the time these Widow Mines are catching the drops or the backstabs. They're just like, even if they're coming across the map, they're not watching. So like the Widow Mine still fires even if they've got a Raven in their army.
Right. And like I notice a lot of Terrans, if they open Raven, they'll make 2 or 3 and then basically stop making Ravens. So once the initial ones die, like there's no more.
That's why like there's the rare game where you keep all of your Ravens alive as a Terran player, and it's like 18 minutes and you've still got like a Raven there, and you're like, oh, this boy has been so sick. He's done so much. Like this is amazing, but it's the rare exception, isn't it? So like this push here, I would have had all those Hellions in Hellbat form, and they obviously wouldn't have done nearly as much, but they would have absorbed a lot more. I think it's still up to you exactly where you use each one, but I definitely think like mid-combat transformation is a little bit dicey.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think like if I know it's coming, I should just transform it preemptively?
Pretty much, yeah. Unless you feel like it's a real Marine-heavy army and you're like, nah, I actually think like the Hellions are one of the biggest damage output parts of my force. But as you get to bigger and bigger tank armies and you're looking at like 180 supply with like 20 Marauders in the mix of bio, it just feels like, yeah, like you just want to be as much tanky shit as possible, because once you get like your 12 siege tanks sieged and firing a volley, like all their shit's gonna die very quickly. So it's just all about protecting the siege tanks, because their firepower is real deadly. But yeah, like I said, I guess there's always going to be the thing, if they're mostly Marine, the Hellions are actually still very powerful units, right? And tanks splash isn't as powerful against Marines. It's still good against them, but like against Marauders, it's crazy. If Marauders are clumped up at all, because they're armored units, they take the full 70 damage from a siege tank shot, which is just insane. Because they're 125 hit points, you stim them, they're 115, they take 70 damage, they're almost dead.
Right.
So yeah, bio in general, just real soft once you get to these good siege tank numbers.
Research complete.
So I'm a big fan of drilling claws, but at the same time, the way you're driving around with your Hellions, Blue Flame could be real nice here as well. So, I mean, what do the numbers work out to be? Like, in this game, you've gone double upgrades. You were a little bit slow on starting them and then continuing them, but
right, and they're not lined up.
Yeah, but how does it line up against Marines? I mean, you've also got tank splash, so it's obviously not just a Hellion Marine interaction. But with Blue Flame, like I'm sure you have a more up-to-date knowledge of the numbers than I do. Does Blue Flame, like, let's imagine it's a combat shield Marine, 55 hit points. It stims, it's at 45 usually. Only so many will actually be getting healed immediately by the medevacs. How much damage does a Hellion do with Blue Flame?
I think it's like double versus light.
Yeah, I'm on a really shitty overlay right now, so I can't even hover over their attack. Can you hover over the Hellions attack and tell me what it's specifically 24?
Yeah. So currently it's damage 9, and versus light it's 21.
21, and that's with +1. So
yeah.
Okay, and how much is that?
I think it's 8 and 19 otherwise.
8 and 19, so it goes up. So it'll go up to 23. So okay, so with +2 and Blue Flame, you will 2-shot Marines after their stim, even if they have combat shields, right? Okay, so like, yeah, so Blue Flame, yeah, okay, it's pretty good. Blue Flame, what does that take it from? It's like +8 extra damage versus light? Because it's 8 plus, it's only +5 actually, isn't it? Because isn't it 8 to 4, isn't it 14 damage with no upgrades versus light? Let's go back to the start of the streak play and check.
So I think with 0-0 it's +9, with 1-1 it's +10. Oh, sorry, with 0-0 it's +11, and then it's +12, +13, +14.
Okay, cool. And you can click on that. Yeah, we can click on that later. So anyway, I mean, I think it's up to you which one you prioritize, but generally Blue Flame and Drilling Claws, they're going to be your 2 actual important upgrades. And you said you weren't sure when to get them or when to prioritize them. I mean, I'm a big fan of always get 3 base, always get double upgrades started first, unless you have a very specific reason for not doing it, right? Like, if you're like, no, I'm actually subbing out most of these early Hellions for Widow Mines, and I've never stopped building Widow Mines from like the 4-minute mark onwards, and I want to go straight for Drilling Claws, I can get behind that. because like they're getting them all over the map and like slowing down their push and that sort of stuff. That's part of your build. So what do you reckon is going to be your priority upgrade here? Blue Flame or Drilling Claws?
I think Blue Flame is definitely the more aggressive one. Maybe. Or maybe not. I think with Drilling Claws, you can also be pretty up in their face. I can just do it at the same time. But definitely after 1-1 started, right?
Okay. So let's say...
After my third base is situated, 1-1 started, then...
Yeah. And this is not a super clean game, but let's just look at it in the context of this game anyway, so we can kind of get an idea. So double armory's down, third's going. We did, of course, a bit lower on gas than we should have been because of that misclick this game, but that's cool. So yeah, make sure we've got at least the third and fourth factory started and the 1-1, right? So basically it's like, okay, 4 factories plus double ups on the way. And then we're going to go bam for those lovely, lovely, delicious upgrades, the Blue Flame and Drilling Claws. So, awesome. Other than that, though, we're not too crazy focused on those as a super high priority. We're going to be ditching more Cyclone production. We're going to be kind of focusing on Drilling Claws and Blue Flame a little bit more whilst deprioritizing like Transformation Servos and Mag Field, which is good, saves us money. So we might be a little bit more tank focused. Like I mentioned earlier, your third, the front was maybe a little bit fragile for a second there. If you start getting punished, we'll focus on it. I'm not going to be like, oh, you need to do that to be safe against the mythological timing, because there's so much that can happen in a game of StarCraft, and that's all fine. What I want to ask you about, though, is at this point, okay, we're a little blind here. What do you think of like a Widow Mine, always having a Widow Mine outside their base? Kind of like the traditional Zergling spotter that a Zerg would have, or like a Marine spotter or something like that. Just to see when an attack comes and potentially get a big hit on like the Marine pack or something like that.
Right. No, I like that. I think that's a great idea. I just need to get in the habit of doing it. So for Vision, I've mostly been doing 2 Patrol Hellions, 1 on either side of the map. But almost never a Widow Mine right outside their base. So I think that sounds really good.
Yeah, I like the idea of a few Widow Mines peppered around, and maybe you're playing a bit more closer to home with most of your mines. You were trying to cover the drop until the turrets went down, like, and stuff, and you're kind of, setting up just around these attack avenues, because obviously, hey, that way you're actually covering your base. But, yeah, I think we could definitely, by the way, would he have, one of those, both of those medevacs would have been hit by the mines if they stayed there. Isn't that so funny? Well, I mean, it still worked out to be a good trade for you, right? Yeah. You reacted well. It was a good cleanup, man.
Speaking of which, I do have an F2 question. In that situation, I'm pretty sure I used F2 as like a, move all my units to my main now move. Do you recommend against that?
I mean, if you already had your army properly control grouped, then it would be fine. You could just go, 1A, 2A, Vikings and main army, but F2 is not the end of the world there. Most of your units are sieged up anyway, so the tanks will stay at the front, the Widow Mines will stay burrowed.
Right.
So you can kind of get away with F2ing back and forth a little bit, as long as you're not in a position where you're like, oh, I accidentally pulled the Vikings, which were meant to be zoning out a drop on the right, and that opens up a hole there for that drop to come in while I'm distracted. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
So Widow Mine outside their base is a little note. But there's also, the potential here for more mines on the map or Blue Flame harassment. And I think these are two just huge winners of what you can do with your style. And I think also Liberator harassment as well. Even if it's just one Liberator, like just there's small little bits of pressure that I think you can squeeze into your play that makes you less of just a turtle kind of peering out from under its shell going, hey, what's happening? And a lot of the time it pays off pretty big. Like even here, if you had ran 4 Hellions into this third, that's not a complete wall. Yeah, the Marines will kill a Hellion, and then you're in the mineral line and like, you're causing lots of trouble and stuff. And because you're doing a pretty fast 4th CC, like anything like that, sometimes you'll be landing a 4th. And like at this point, you like might not technically have the numbers to cover that. Like let's imagine your opponent's at 180 supply right now. more fearsome stuff. Like we actually have a hole in our turrets on the right, but that's fine because we want to obviously get the turrets up down there, and most importantly down along this bottom edge, which is one thing. Like so you've got some nice turrets there, but I would like some more along the bottom edge to stop the drops getting in, because that's always the most important, right? At the very edge of the map where possible. But the thing is, if you're running Hellions in a mineral line and then a Liberator's sieging up his main mineral line, and then like, you know, you've got some Widow Mines peppered around the map and he keeps walking into them, so he's more like nervous and like, shit, I gotta watch my army as it's roaming around the map. Suddenly, like, you can just build a 4th on location and get away with it because he's just busy with other things, right? And this is every player's nightmare. A mech player who knows how to just queue up like bits of harassment, like random Liberators and this sort of stuff, and then you look back and there's like a planetary on the 4th and you're like, when did that get there? Like, what the shit? Oh, there's no way that I should have let that happen.
I've actually been doing that a lot for TvT. I've like just, you know, non-stop queue up for Hellions into random bases, and I feel like it's just won me half my TvTs.
Dude, with Battle Mech at the moment, oh, it's so good, dude. Very good way to play. Yeah. I mean, you've been making me do a lot of over the last month. You were bribing me to do a lot of Mass Widow Mine plays. There was quite a few games where I was just queuing up Liberators and Mines into Zerg's bases for like 20 minutes until they had an aneurysm, I think, from the stress. Like they were just like, Jesus Christ. Like, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, if they like Nidus or attack me with 20 speed roaches, I have nothing to defend. But thank God I'm like just being a douchebag. Yeah, there's no way they can leave their base. If they didn't pre-plan to hit me with a timing attack, they're just kind of busy. So it's good shit, man. That was nice though, that drop that just flew into your tank like desperately and just got destroyed. So yeah, I think like a few little bits of harassment at various points in this game just would have been amazing. Like, you know, because he was on the right-hand side, we would have probably ran 4 Hellions in from there into that mineral line. A Liberator going along the right-hand side into the main can be good, or along bam, bam. And these are things as well. So if you're ever, let's talk very quickly about what if you really fucked up your early game, man. You fucked it up. You're way behind. What's a cool comeback style? So, and this, what made me think about this was, yeah, here it is, about 8 minutes. This double Viking harassment, right? So, let's just talk through this real quickly. What if you're way behind? So, do you have any way you adjust your playstyle if you're way behind? Like, is there any change up? Do you have any preset plan?
Right, great question. I think most of the times when I'm way behind, I just play my same build, like, you know, 3 minutes offset, something like that.
So what's really cool is if we focus really hard on something. So how do you usually lose? If you're way behind, is it like you can't secure the 3rd base, so they just run over you? Like let's say mech versus bio specifically. Like what sort of, how do you often lose the game if you're already behind early? Like how does that actualize? Like how do you go from I'm behind to I'm dead?
Oh, I see. Like, given that I'm behind, like, when do I actually die?
Yeah.
When I can't really secure the 3rd and 4th.
Usually we die from not securing 3rd and 4th base, and we just kind of get choked out. Okay, cool. Sometimes overran as well, but or as we're moving out to get them, we get overran, right? Okay. So what's a good game plan? So those 2 Vikings was part of it, right? Because you just kind of went for a random Viking land. And this also made me think about, wouldn't it be cool if instead of doing that, we had 1 Viking here? So go to everyone's camera. 1 Viking here, 1 Viking here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Can you ping that again?
Bam and bam.
Yep.
For anyone who's watching, you need to be on everyone's camera, guys. So imagine we had a Viking on both sides. Mm-hmm. And you waited until you saw his units move out into your Widow Mine in that slow field. Your Widow Mine gets a big shot because all his Marines are clumped up in that slow field. Even though he sees it, he can't react.
Yep.
And you just queue these 2 Vikings to go in. And you don't even micro them. 1 in the natural, 1 in the main mineral line.
Oh, so like 4 total?
No, just one in each. Rather than sending 2 down the right-hand side of the map, you split them.
Right.
Create more problems for our opponent. But we also then wait to hit them at the right time. So the problem here was you were completely blind. You didn't know he had 20 Marines with Sim sitting just at his natural. So like as you're landing, he's already like there and he just shuts this down and you waste like 2 seconds of mining time and get an SCV. Whereas I regularly win TvTs with a Viking or a Liberator landing in a mineral line because I do it right when they're microing their engagement. And that's like the number of comebacks they've made from that is so silly.
Right. I noticed when I watch you play, it's like right after you do the initial micro on the big engagement, you like jump to your harass units, queue them up, and then come back to the main armor.
Yeah. And I'm not going to actively micro them at all. I often look back at it after the fight's fizzled out and, you know, kind of cackle madly as I realize the Liberator's still alive and has 25 kills. And I go, I don't deserve this.
Good damage, I say.
Good damage. Yeah. Usually we die from not securing the third and fourth base. So, I mean, when we're behind, little bits of Viking harassment is nice, right? So more harassment can be really good, right? More harassment, but also that tells us, well-timed harassment. Let's make sure it goes in as they're distracted, you know. So basically, like, as an engage happens, is the best. But that's very hard to do while you're microing a fight, right? So just as they're out on the map, posturing is still damned good. Like what I said, where, okay, he's moved his army out of his base, like he's not gonna have units nearby. He's gonna have to grab shit that's like popping out of production facilities, like, and we're hitting two places at once, right? So hitting two places at once is also amazing, right? So the holy trifecta, right, is you wait till he's engaging, trying to break you, and you queue Hellions to hit one mineral line and a Liberator to hit another mineral line. And you don't micro either of them. You just click them in there, and then you micro at home and try to survive. And you often look back and like they've just lost so much stuff because it's right when they're not paying attention and you've hit two different places, so you've created maximum problems for them at once. Now that's cool. That's harassment. That's backstabs. But you're still landing Vikings in your opponent's mineral line, whether he's playing mech or bio. You're way behind. We can't beat him on the ground and in the air. And this is the same thing you apply for all races. It's the reason why as a Protoss player, when you want to come back against a Terran, you just don't make anything except Zealots. You just make like double upgrades charge and you make like 400 Zealots and you just don't take gases. You just make a shitload of charge Zealots, and if you can get the right engage, you crush his ground army. Now, why does that make sense from the Protoss perspective? Because how does a Protoss go from being behind to losing? It's Terran doing a big push, bio, mine, bio, tank, bio, Liberator, and overwhelming you. What always beats bio if you have enough of it? Charge Zealots, right? Charge Zealots are an amazing unit. As long as you get the right angle, as long as you got enough numbers to just overwhelm, you can always crush through a bio army, right? So that's like and they're also a very efficient unit. They're really cheap Zealots, right? Now, obviously, if the game goes long enough and your opponent doesn't give you that fight, having 100 supply of Zealots is kind of shit. Same thing with a Zerg playing just Massling Bane and not going Hydras or Mutas, because they say, I'm too far behind against this Terran, I can't afford the Hydras or the Mutas, I can't afford the anti-air units, I've just got to crush the ground army. And the same thing we want to apply here as a Terran. We want to say, I can't afford to non-stop build Vikings and non-stop build tanks and have Hellions and Libs for harassment and do all my normal things, because I'm still going to be at half their Viking count. I'm still going to be 2 tanks short of actually defending the big bio arc of units stimming into my base. So we're just going to lose every front. So what we want to do is we want to say, I want to sacrifice one front completely and just say, let's stop investing in that. So for me, do we normally die to our opponent's Vikings? No. They give them an edge in the tank war or the placement war, right? So we give up the air war completely, right? So a really good thing is give up one war. One focus, and focus entirely our strategy on another area, right? It becomes a gamble inherently, but a gamble we can win, as opposed to trying to do everything from behind. It's almost a sure loss. Exactly.
Right. Actually, I make that mistake a lot. Like if I'm behind on Vikings, they have like 8 and I have like 2. I would just keep making Vikings, but that just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. My favorite is just stop building Vikings and focus on more ground. Now, but then they'll have Liberators with their Vikings. So what's a real simple, cheap, easy way we can deal with that? It's not perfect, but the Thor. We could have a single Thor on high impact payload, and it can snipe down that single Liberator or those 2 Liberators before they do too much damage. And the Vikings aren't really going to do anything to that Thor. And yeah, you can technically get very slowly pushed back, especially if they have like ranged libs and tanks covering them just right. But it's going to like slow them down drastically, right? It's going to like be like, well, you invested a shit ton of stuff in this Viking lib, and it's like, it's barely able to make headway at the cost of a lot of micro. So stop building Vikings and focus more on ground. So what if you've got those 2 or 3 Vikings and they've got 8? Well, those Vikings are worthless. So a lot of people go, oh, let's land them. Landed Viking is just a fucking waste of money. It's not going to do anything for you, right? Like it's useless. But if you go and use those as harassment units instead, they're still a really good harassment unit, right? So, you know, use leftover Vikings for harassment. Swap to lib production for harassment with excess money. And most importantly, just add a Thor to cover the AA. Maybe a few Widow Mines, but probably just a Thor. And, or at Thor is what I wrote there. A Thor, not at Whore. Add a Thor. That's going to cover the AA. And have enough tanks, Hellbats, etc. to crush the ground battle, right? And the cool thing is you can give up one war and you can still get back into it later. So you can always down the track say, I've got 5 bases now, he's on 3. And it's getting kind of awkward playing against these range libs. Let's drop 3 starports and start my ship weapons and actually contest the skies. So it's not always like all things considered, like, and I gave those other examples because this is a very common situation. I'll never forget the time in a PvP, the matchup where people are like, you can't come back in a PvP. If they're ahead, you're just dead. And SOS just didn't take gases, made charge zealots, no upgrades, and he beat +2 Archons. Because he just got a 3rd mineral line. He was like down like 15 workers, down 2 upgrades, way inferior tech. And he said, I'm SOS, I'm the king of gambles. And he made like 45 zealots and he set up a surround. And the other guy was like, well, time to go push and use this gigantic advantage right at the optimum point. And he just got surrounded by like 45 zealots and the Archons weren't as effective. And this gigantic advantage, like +2 Archons versus charge zealots is so gross. And it was just this same thing. If SOS had no detection if DTs came in, he didn't have anti-air if like some random oracles came in, he'd given up having upgrades, he had no Archons, he had no follow-up tech, there was no transition, he had nothing else going for him. But like, you know, that's why I love watching him and Hass and stuff. They're the masters of like, I'm talking about cutting out like the Viking production. They'll cut out like 6 other things as well to focus so hard on one thing. And that's why these cheesier players, especially the flexible ones, the SOSs, are so smart to watch and to learn from, because there's all these parts of a build order which we build up a strong, solid place. We've got good fundamentals, and then they say, actually, I'm going to skip that. We don't need them to make this one thing work. And you're like, oh shit. And it just makes you remember your assumptions in the game, right? Those players are really valuable for making us remember our assumptions. So this is the same thing. We can apply any matchup, any situation, trying to just focus really super hard on one thing to get back in the game. And I really like this idea of giving up the air war and just focusing on the ground. So a lot of bio players do this against mech, where they go, oh shit, he's already won the first fight. I'm just going to build medevacs and try to do a lot of drops and stuff. And when the fight happens, it has to be me just jumping on top of the mech and overwhelming quickly, because otherwise the Vikings are just going to pick off my medevacs, and you know he's going to have the vision advantage, and it's going to go badly. So they have to like shift styles and say it's all about swarming over, running past, doing drops, backstabbing, right? So thinking about it, that's also the bio player's mentality when they're going medevacs against your Vikings.
Right. That makes sense, because it's like, even though it's a gamble, it's at least it's a 10-20% chance of winning instead of like a 0 if I were to go the normal route.
And I would actually say if you get good at it, it will very quickly become more than 50%, just because it's such a clean strategic focus for you. Like it can actually end up being really good. And the thing is, you can then like, there's people who will play this. Let's love out of this replay. They will play this every game. They'll be like, oh no, I just always play that gamble, even when I'm even. And they friggin' crush. Right? Like they
just so clean.
Yeah, and like their opponents aren't used to it. It's like, how does he have so much of this? It's like, well, he just cut out the 12 Vikings that you built. Like, what are you doing, dude? You know, I lose sometimes to someone who's crushing through, and I'm like, shit, how do they get overwhelmed? This often happens because I don't play much mech anymore. But when I do play mech, because it's like inconsistent, and I'm like, cool, and I'm like focusing on that Viking count, and then I'm like, oh, he swapped to medevacs ages ago, and I didn't even realize. And I've got 14 Vikings, and I'm like, shit. And like, I'm trying to send them off to harass, and it's kind of too late because he's already overrun my ground army, and I'm like, But I think it's really cool, because I think we just got like such a useful list of different notes, right? We talked about Viking count and how we can swap out of it, and and just cut the count so we don't need to keep investing in Viking count. Once we've got a Viking advantage and they're not contesting us, we're good. But we've also talked about saying if they've got the Viking advantage, or if we're simply too far behind that we think, well, that's not the biggest priority, it's more the tanks and stuff, we can just cut air production, not focus on it, just use air units for harassment. We've also talked about cutting down cyclone production, getting rid of that mag field so we can kind of jump up to the tanks a little bit quicker, jump up to the drilling claws, the blue flame, and get to that next stage. We've come up with a few little things. I love that, just getting you to write out your build, right? You didn't immediately have the written down version of knowing where the gases were, but you'd already chunked that together, chained that together with the command center going down, the third CC. Those little details are awesome. So I think you're already doing a lot of things right. Dude, this is a really good theory discussion. What's the time? What's the time? We've got only a few minutes left. Do you want to look at another replay quickly of one where you got bopped and see if there's any silly misconceptions? Or at least I can just like look at your own analysis of you getting bopped, because you said there were like 2 replays of you just dying,
I
right?
have a quick unrelated question.
Yeah, we can just talk theory.
I've been experimenting with mech versus Protoss,
My man.
and it seems to work when you have like a critical mass of tanks and Hellions and Widows.
Yeah.
Is this a bad path to pursue? Like, is it just, am I winning through luck? Because
No, it's...
my highest MMR win against was against a Protoss, and I
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to talk about the weak point of mech on stream here. There'll be too many of your ladder opponents listening, maybe. We'll see. Essentially, let's talk about my game plan of PvT to start unpacking this issue, right? If I'm playing PvT versus mech, okay? So... Pig's plan, PvT versus the Mechios. The delicious Cyclones. Banshee is one of the most powerful and frustrating parts, actually, of a good mech build. If you get momentum, those Banshees. And Ghosts as well. Basically, it's generally... The Protoss detection can be a bit weird, but even tank Hellbat pushes can just be devastating if the Protoss doesn't deal with it just right. So basically what I do is ideally... if I've gone Blink, I think Blink is perfect versus it, right? Because you can just jump on like Cyclones and like Widowmine drops and stuff, and like really like makes it a bit harder for the Terran player to do harassment, right? But essentially what I want to do is I go 3 mineral lines of 3 to 4 gases, 10 gate, double prism, Stalker Zealot timing. Every single game. I do this every single game, no matter what, against mech, right? And the idea is 1 prism hits the main for a big charge lot warp in, plus 4 Zealot unload, because 4 Zealots will kill a Cyclone really quickly. So if a Cyclone pops out and quickly like locks on, hopefully those Zealots can kill it before it gets the prism. It's always a bit dicey, but you know, especially on a map like King's Cove, it's pretty easy to get inside the main because there's so much dead space. So it's a little map dependent. And then yeah, basically you just YOLO the front, and YOLO the front at the same time. If Prism dies, just warp in at front. And the idea here is, as this attack happens, what am I gonna do? 4th base, 5th base soon after, non-stop chrono probes. I've probably done this off single forge. I basically go 2nd forge, you know, Templar archives for Storm, 2nd robo, non-stop. You get the picture, right? And for me, a lot of people will try to go Stargate against this. They'll just try to rush to carriers or tempests. I'm a 20 gateway, 100 probe man myself.
Just like keep throwing units in.
Oh yeah, and like, you know, you can, yeah, it's just like if a Protoss gets to a good enough position and you're like, cool, I want to fight. You're like, it's time to push. And then like, how did he get another 6 Immortals and 40 Zealots? Like, this is disgusting. Like the Protoss can really zerg over you if they get to a big enough economy. But the other thing you have to watch out for, so thinking about it there, is there's a few points we're going to talk about that, right? So this is, let's. What does this achieve? That first timing I was talking about. So that first timing usually wins the game, or cripples the Terran severely. And this is the thing. Why is this such a useful timing? The Terran can't both have the 3rd up and a full wall at 3rd and natural, and a turret ring.
Right.
And enough shit to cover every angle all at once. And like often there'll be like a tank in a really good position because I've got like, the observer spotting. I just blink forward and snipe this like one really good placed tank on the high ground or something. And I just don't care as much about my units because the Terrans, like I've got 4 siege tanks and 3 widow mines and 2 Vikings and my turrets are going up. But like the moment there's zealots in the back of a base, they just don't have a lot of units to reveal to get on top of it very quickly. There's like this weak point usually. And the thing is, if the Terran gets like 1 minute past that weak point, the same attack can just look like an absolute piece of shit. And the Terran's like, yep, and now I'm taking my 4th and I've got the double upgrades rolling and my army's building. And they definitely can get to this point. So Terran struggles to consistently make it to getting the 3rd secured. And that sort of thing without the Protoss having, either killed them or done 100 probes and just gone insane on their own economy back at home and be able to just throw stuff at them. Now, that being said, everything I just described to you, not many people on the ladder can do. Most Protoss players on the ladder are not nearly as flexible as they need to be. They very much want to follow a standard game plan. There's people who will see mech and they'll still just keep building Colossus and like Stalkers or something. And I'll be like, yeah. And you're like, okay, like this can slow down a push, but like I don't know how you're ever going to beat, like how are you going to get through a tank army with these units that can't even kill siege tanks? Like Stalkers and Colossus do not kill tanks. And they're like, okay, I'll add Disruptors. I'm like, okay, that's also kind of good for buying time. And then because Thors are very good versus Tempests now, you can't just get like a few Tempests and it doesn't just automatically counter the mech army if they've managed to get a few Thors out. So it gets real interesting. And I don't actually play against it that much. So I think it's a pretty good style. I think definitely that timing attack I talked about, is that a free win for the Protoss? No. That's just kind of what you have to focus on, right? It's all about, can I get that 3rd? Or are they being a greedy shitbag, right? Like, so I think scouting and having strategic scans is very important. Strategic scans or harassment scouting, so whether that be Banshees, drops of Hellions, whatever. Very important to find out, is that big timing coming? Or are they going 5 base? 5 base, 100 probes, etc. And secondarily, are they rushing Sky Toss, which is a very common, and that's what you'll see all the pros do. And obviously that filters down. I still think going Sky Toss is way more complicated way of beating mech than it needs to be. I think it's much simpler to make a lot of Zealots and Immortals and go, cool, these units are good. Add some Psystorm in there. Start doing, people are like, oh, but then they lock down their 3 bases. And like my answer to that is, yeah, but then I'll blink 20 DTs into their main. Like that's my way of skinning the mech goat. It's like, I'm like, I don't want to make Tempest carrier against Thor, Widowmine, Vikings. I don't know how that plays out. That's fucking weird. Like, and there's a lot of players who are in Platinum who are like, well, I saw Zest beat it with Skytoss, so I'm going to do that. And like the games look like such a shit show because nobody knows how to handle those unit compositions. The Terran doesn't, neither does the Protoss. When I see pros doing it, it's like a little bit dicey. So I always would much prefer to just be like, make lots of ground things that I know how to use and just backstab. And if it comes to frontal engagements, I'm looking to flank and surround that mech army, which as a Zerg player, I'm very comfortable making lots of lower quality units and looking for the perfect engage. This is why I excel in a scenario where I get to make a lot of ground poundy, Zealot, Immortal, or something like that, and really just focus on that one engagement because surrounding a mech army is second nature to me. So that's I think some interesting theory there. Honestly, just securing the 3rd is really good. Now let's think about it from your side. The key power of mech TVP is its harassment. Like you can just do insane harassment that goes so smoothly into mech builds because you're often wanting a tech lab on a starport the whole game or a factory on a tech lab or whatever it is you need to do that. Or if you've got Hellions left over, like they're a good part of your army, right? So I just feel like in general, mech always goes better from crazy wild harassment into a macro game than bio builds do. Whereas how bio builds, it's like even when they open up wildly aggressive, it's like, man, you do the drop here, there's the Hellion run by, they do the Liberator, and they're like, cool. They've got 3 CC at home and they're just starting their 2nd and 3rd barracks and there's like a 4-minute window until Stim, Shields, and Medevacs are out. And in that 4-minute window, the Protoss just holds down the probe key and gets back into a good position because there's such a big window. Whereas the Protoss player, the Terran player who's going mech is like, yeah, but I mean, I'm still building Hellions even while taking a 4th base, and these Hellions are like running into a mineral line, and this Banshee's poking around, or this Liberator's poking in. So there's more of an ability to consistently apply pressure with mech in general as you build up, and that often is the secret to success. So if you're experimenting with it, what's your opening?
So actually, it's similar. It's Hellion Cyclone. Actually, it's very similar to TvT. Hellion Cyclone, a bit more emphasis on Thors, depending on their air composition. And more emphasis on tank late game. And I just try to have like this critical mass of tanks, Widow Mines, Hellions.
But what about your harassment? Is it just frontal poking with Hellion Cyclone and that's it?
So occasional Hellion. So no Liberators, none of that. And I know that I feel like Protoss players are like kind of eager to push in to your base. So like if I just play defensively until maybe the 8-minute mark, you know, they'll maybe attack, trade inefficiently, and then I have like this ball of tanks that I can just like push across the map and destroy the third or something like that. Third or fourth.
I think that's pretty good then. As it stops working, you've got Pig's recommendation there. Add more special source on the harassment. Add a medevac to do some Hellion drops rather than going fast 2 factory, or a Liberator versus Robo openings, or simply be a bit more creative with a 2-pronged Hellion pressure where you distract on one side and run in the other. Whatever it is. Just something to be a little bit more saucy, a little bit more of that special sauce. But we're out of time for now.
It's good to keep in mind.
So, sorry, we are running just over time, but
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
no worries, man. I think this was a good discussion. I think hopefully that really helps you with your theory, because it didn't look like a bad game that we got to watch there at all. But I think like there's little things you were delaying, right? With like your third CC was a little late, and like the you know, more importantly, it was like, you know, we're getting mag field in a third Cyclone, and now we're like, yeah, like cut a Cyclone, cut the mag field out. Get a Widowmine spotter out, be a little bit more patient with our like Viking lands for harassment, like wait for the right moment. There's just like a lot of little details that we talked about. So as always, I want you to reread these notes tomorrow when your mind's fresh. Practice games now, you know, have some fun with it, but go reread these notes tomorrow when your brain's fresh, and everything will really settle in. And as you encounter more problems, write them down, and hopefully your TvT can hit a new peak, man.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah, I think next game I'll definitely focus more on the being behind early game situation, whether it's not being able to come back or just flat out dying early game. I think that's certainly another one of my the holes in my gameplay. But awesome, man. Thank you so much.
No, that's really cool, man. And the great thing about practicing that as well is it's like you've got nothing to lose, you know? That's a situation where normally you play on, but you die the vast majority of the time anyway. So it's like, it's actually really liberating when you like recognize in game, this game's fucked. It's a gimme for my opponent. Let's like there's nothing to lose. Let's focus really super hard on that. So yeah.
Yeah, true.
It's sick, man. All right. Well, good night. I might see you in chat and stuff, but good sesh, and let me know how it goes, man.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. Have a good one.
Good night, brother.